Welcome back to Talking Story. My name is John Minton, and I'm going to cover a trilogy today that I don't know if a lot of you have read it. If you haven't, you're missing out. I'm going to give you 5, maybe even 6, really good reasons that you want to read the Empire Trilogy by Raymond E. Feist and Janny Wurts. This trilogy came out back in the 80s. It's the second trilogy in the Rift War Saga series by Raymond E. Feist, but Janny E. Wurts came on board for the second trilogy, and it, I think, just elevated the whole thing. I'm a big fan of the Rift War Saga. It's one of the things, I bought these books immediately when they came out in the 80s. I ran to the bookstore every time a new book came out, and I devoured it. I absolutely loved it. Now, does it get a bad rap lately? I think it kind of does. We've kind of all moved on, subverting the genre and doing different things. But people will say, oh, the Rift War Saga, this is tropey. You know what? I got no problem with tropiness. I'm all about it. For me, you get pieces and you put them out there because you know they work and you love them. If I get a big pot and I get some potatoes and I get some carrots and I get some stew meat and I get some delectable gravy with some little bit of onion and garlic, and I got a great stew. And every time I have a stew, I want those same ingredients in my bowl, right? So for me, tropiness isn't a bad word. I don't understand why that gets a bad rap unless it becomes so familiar it has nothing left to unveil that's new. That is not the case with the Empire Trilogy. Overall, does the Rift War Saga have those tried and true tropes that we all know and love? You know, a chosen one coming up through the ranks. Yes, it does. It absolutely does. It moves through those beats of a story. This actually breaks those rules in a lot of ways because the Rift War Saga, it takes place on a world and then you have some portal magic and another world just comes pouring through and there's a war, right? This Trilogy 2 gives you a look at that other world that came pouring through on top of your favorite characters here from that first trilogy. So you get to see the adversarial side. You get to see the alien type side. This is not necessarily that European feudal medieval setting that we all know and love. This is far more of a different type of vibe. It is not as tropey as the rest of the overall Rift War Saga, and the prose and everything else in this is absolutely well worth the read. So let's dispel the idea of, oh, it's from the 80s, it's tropey, it's not worth your time. Let's get rid of all that right now, and let's go through point by point why you want to grab this trilogy and give it a read. I'm going to tell you right now, this is going to find a place on my all-time list, this trilogy. So I cannot stress enough how great this is and how much you should absolutely read it. Number 1, this is one of the best political fantasies, bar none. And I am counting the newer stuff like Game of Thrones and things like that. Yes, there are political machinations. And not only are there political machinations, you can always understand the sides. You can always understand the character motivations. You can always see through the intrigue of who's pulling the strings and who is doing what and who to root for. And it is absolutely lovely and wonderful, and it keeps you turning pages. It is not reliant on that old, and I'm going to keep saying this, and it's not something that I hate, but it's not the old tropes of the quest type of fantasy. This is straight on political fantasy. And if you want something that is complex and something that is involved and something that moves through the political machinations of different families and different sides trying to play this, not Game of Thrones, but I think it's called Game of Council is what they call it. This is a wonderful, wonderful political fantasy all the way through all 3 books. Number 2, as I said, this is not your usual fantasy setting. This goes beyond that portal that poured into the usual fantasy setting in the Rift War Saga, and it goes to the other side, the adversarial side. This is much, much different. It is very Asian influenced with a type of honor code among families, of the ruling families, and it's very different than your regular European feudal fantasy world. Asian influenced, and it also has this lovely, beautiful touch of the alien. One of the cultures in this trilogy is the Shoja, and that they're not a people, they're like an insectoid race. And you can imagine the horror this would cause when a bunch of insectoid warriors pour through into a medieval setting, and how that would upset the apple cart of your regular fantasy. Now we get to go through to the other side. How do these insectoid type, very complex culture and race deal with an Asian influence culture and race that revolves around honor? How do they fit in? How do they operate day to day? How do they work along with these families in the Asian influence culture? So it's like an Asian influence world with a touch of the weird, a touch of the alien that is just completely offsetting. Even the flora and the fauna of this world, while recognizable, is just a little bit off kilter, because again, we're going through the looking glass of that portal magic that poured into a world we all know. And in this second trilogy, we're somewhere entirely different. And it so amazingly breaks those tropes, if you don't necessarily like those tropes of fantasy, particularly from the 80s. Number 3, I cannot think of a better series or trilogy with a stronger female protagonist. Mara is an unbelievable female protagonist, and each of these books, she takes a moment of her life and you get a moment of her journey overall through her life. She's that female protagonist that many times I thought I would think while I was reading this, and again, a more modern political fantasy that I love is Game of Thrones. So I would contrast and compare it with that. She absolutely can be as ruthless and hardcore as Cersei Lannister when needed, but at the same time, she never loses her ability to continue to move forward and to become a better human. She never loses that nurturing side. So we get that great idea of what it would be like for a fantasy family to be run by a matriarch as opposed to a patriarch. She never loses that nurturing aspect of herself as far as breaking traditions in this tradition-run, honor-run, Asian-influenced world of giving people second chances, even if they've been pushed outside of the norm of society. She's willing to open herself up. If it's to her own good and her own family's potential moving forward, she's able to open up and give people a second chance and offer a hand through her nurturing nature as being a matriarch as opposed to a patriarch. So is she ruthless? Can she bring the hammer down when she needs to? Yeah, she can get cold-blooded without a doubt. So she does have that strength of Cersei, and she does have the leadership qualities as she moves on. In the beginning, she's very much of a neophyte ruler of her family at 17, and as she moves through the books, you'll see that change. And you'll see her change and grow in her personhood, in her willingness to step outside of her regular traditions in this world and question authority and question those traditions, maybe if it's not for the good of all the people in the society. So she's continually moving as a character, journeying as a character, never losing her strength as a matriarch, never losing that nurturing center as a matriarch. She's just an amazing, wonderful female protagonist. And I love what Janny Wirtz was able to bring to the pairing, to bring all that out that is not there oftentimes in fantasy, because we don't have a lot of female authors in fantasy, or not near enough. And this is just such an amazing example of a female protagonist that you just love to root for and you love to follow her on their overall journey. Number 4, each of these 3 books, as I said before, is a moment in time of Mara's life. Each one has a self-contained story. Each one is from a different period of her life. Each one has a triumph of spirit, and an ending that will have you in tears and thrilled and emotional. And at the same time, you can't wait to pick up that next book, even though it had a distinctive ending for book 1 to 2 to 2 to 3. So it's such a great long form look at a character's life and the changes that that life can have from starting out at 17 to ending up when she's a bit world weary, a little bit grayer, a little bit wiser, and has lost a lot more. And book 1 starts with great loss. By the time you get to book 3, you see someone's travails and journeys through unbelievable, like I say, triumph of the spirit and tears of joy of seeing someone overcome, and at the same time, grace in their loss. So each one of these is a point in a character's life, so you get a long form look at somebody's life overall. I've not read Robin Hobb, but it's kind of what I get the sense that her character work is. And I just absolutely loved sticking with someone for that long of a period. It was absolutely done wonderfully. Number 5, this is an absolute wonderful tale of human spirit overcoming prejudices and being open. Again, as I said, the journey, the experience of Mara from 1 book to 3, and the questioning of those traditions. Book 2 is a bit of a love story, and she becomes in love with a slave from that world that we started in Rift War, in the Rift War series. And through her love of a person from a different culture, she's able to question her own culture, and she's able to start to realize that we are bigger when we accept the differences and when we start to bring differences into our own soul and spirit and have questions for ourselves and take a little bit of the other. In this case, it's a Western influence and an Eastern influence, and the sum of those two parts when they come together is stronger and better, and it's such an amazingly beautiful message that we are bigger and better than the sum of our differences, and we are far more alike than apart. And what a great message for today's world that just struck me to my very core, and I absolutely loved it. And as I said before, each one of these books you have that signature ending, and you have that triumph of human spirit moment over obstacles, and a lot of it can be done by accepting the differences in those around you, not only accepting them, but taking them into yourself and letting it change who you are to your very core, to where you can question the world around you and thereby change the world around you. Beautiful, beautiful message, and beautifully done. Those are my 1 through 5 reasons why you should pick this up. Now, I'm going to give you just a number 6, a little extra. Even though I said this was 5 great reasons, I'll throw one more out there, and that one more out there is the prose is just lush and delicious and dense and beautiful, and it will transport you to this world that is strange and alien, and you will just revel in it and see it. And I as I said, I was a big fan of the Rift War saga, but I think when Janny Wirtz brings her prose work alongside of Raymond E. Feist, it just elevates it and just gives it that little bit of texture that just makes you go, wow. This, guys, is good stuff. Don't be afraid because you've heard the Rift War stuff is tropey and familiar and it has nothing new to offer. This second trilogy, which was absolutely can be read on its own, if you don't want to get into the whole Rift War saga and you don't want to get into those tried and true tropes that the first Rift War story starts out with, skip right to the second trilogy when Janny Wirtz comes on board. The Daughter of the Empire trilogy is phenomenal. Do yourself a favor and add this to your TBR as soon as you possibly can. those are my 5+1 reasons to pick this up. My name is John Minton. This has been Talking Story. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. If you have read this, hey, drop down in that comment section. Let me know what you thought of it. If you have not read it and you plan to, drop down in that comment section and let me know. If you have something that you think maybe I haven't read that after hearing this you know I would love to read, drop down in that comment section and let me know. I love comments. I love talking back and forth. It is the best part of BookTube, and don't hold back. Hit me up in those comments. Thank you so much for spending time with me again. My name is John Minton, and this has been Talking Story.